Think about a time when, like, your sheer willpower just completely failed you.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Right. Maybe you resolved to break a bad habit, or you swore you wouldn't lose your temper during some stressful meeting. But then, the moment the pressure spikes, your brain just seems to go offline.
You snap or you completely shut down.
Exactly. Or you reach for the exact coping mechanism you were, like, desperately trying to quit.
Yeah.
And we usually treat those moments as moral failings, right? Like a lack of discipline.
Yeah, just not trying hard enough.
But what if those moments have absolutely nothing to do with your character and literally everything to do with your cellular biology?
That is the crucial pivot we have to make here. I mean, we spend so much time trying to think our way out of problems that our bodies are actually physically orchestrating, like way beneath our conscious awareness.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking on a pretty massive mission today. We're going to fundamentally redefine the word trauma.
It's a heavy topic, but so important.
It really is. And we're pulling from the extensive research and, honestly, the profound insights of Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She's a pediatrician, a trauma science expert, and the former Surgeon General of California.
Her work is just groundbreaking.
Incredible stuff. And for you listening right now, I want to set the stakes clearly from the start. This is not just a conversation about psychology or, feeling sad about the past.
I know, not at all.
We are getting into the hard mechanics of physical health. Like why you get sick, why you inexplicably snap at your partner over some minor comment, and why your nervous system might be operating on a set of survival instructions that you didn't even know were written.
Right. And to really understand that operating system, we have to establish a core paradigm shift right out of the gate.
Okay, lay it on us.
It's this. Trauma is not the event that happened to you. Trauma is your body's ongoing biological response to that event.
Wow. Okay, that distinction completely alters the landscape. Because if the trauma isn't the car accident or the chaotic household or, like, the toxic boss.
Exactly. It's not the event itself.
Yeah. But rather, it's the physiological chain reaction that stays switched on inside your body long after the threat is actually gone. I mean, then we're talking about a chronic biological condition.
It is. It's a biological imprint. And to prove that this isn't just some rare, niche medical anomaly, we can look to the seminal 1998 Adverse Childhood Experiences study.
The ACE study, right?
Yeah, widely known as the ACE study. It was conducted by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, and honestly, it remains one of the most significant public health discoveries of our time. They surveyed 17,500 people.
Which is massive.
It gives this data incredible statistical power.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because 17,500 people is a huge sample size for a behavioral health study. What were the researchers actually measuring when they looked at these individuals?
So they evaluated the participants' exposure to 10 specific categories of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs.
What kind of categories are we talking about?
They broadly capture early adversity, so they include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, and then household dysfunction.
Household dysfunction is a pretty broad term. What does that cover?
It covers things like growing up with a parent who had an unmanaged mental health disorder or substance dependence, maybe a parent who was incarcerated, or just living in a home with parental separation or intimate partner violence.
The prevalence of those experiences is staggering once you actually look at the raw data.
It really is.
I mean, 2/3 of the people surveyed had experienced at least one ACE. 2/3. The vast majority of us are walking around with at least one.
Right, and 1 in 6 people have experienced 4 or more of these categories.
So this isn't some fringe issue. This is like the mainstream human experience.
The prevalence is critical, yeah, but the biological revelation here is the dose-response relationship the researchers discovered.
Dose response.
Yeah.
Like with medicine.
Exactly like pharmacology. A dose response means the higher the dose of a medication, the stronger the physical effect. Well, the ACE study proved that early adversity acts the exact same way.
Oh, wow. So more adversity equals a worse physical effect.
Yes. The higher a person's ACE score, the exponentially worse their physical health outcomes are as an adult. A person with 4 or more ACEs isn't just a little worse off.
What are the numbers?
They are 4.5 times more likely to experience depression. They are 10 times more likely to be dependent on opiates. And they are 2.5 times more likely to develop heart disease.
I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, because the traditional medical model would look at those statistics and immediately blame lifestyle choices.
Oh, absolutely. That was the standard assumption for years.
Right, because if someone grows up in a highly stressful, dysfunctional environment, they're statistically more likely to self-medicate. They might drink more, smoke, or eat highly processed foods just to cope with the emotional pain.
Hmm.
So isn't the heart disease simply the mechanical result of a lifetime of bad habits?
For decades, the medical community assumed exactly that. They believed the adversity caused psychological pain, which then caused bad habits, which caused disease.
But I'm guessing that's not the whole story.
Not at all. The researchers dug deeper. They statistically controlled for those health-damaging behaviors. They looked at the data for people with 4 or more ACEs who did not smoke, who exercised regularly, and who ate a balanced diet.
And the risk was still there.
It was massive. The researchers found that only 50% of the disease risk comes from those behavioral coping mechanisms.
Okay, really, only half.
Only half. The other 50% is the direct, unmediated result of an overactive stress response.
That is wild.
When the brain's alarm system is constantly firing, it just pumps the body full of stress hormones. Over years, those hormones cause chronic physical inflammation. It's literally the physiological wear and tear of being in a constant state of hypervigilance.
So the body is essentially injuring itself from the inside out because the alarm system just forgot how to turn off.
Yeah.
But that challenges another really deep-seated cultural belief we have, right? The idea that time heals all wounds. Because if a person experienced severe neglect when they were, say, 2 years old, but they are now 30 and have absolutely zero conscious memory of that time,
The assumption is they're fine.
right, shouldn't the body be off the hook? The mind forgot, so the threat is gone.
The reality is completely the inverse, and Dr. Burke Harris illustrates this powerfully with a case from her own pediatric clinic. She evaluated a little boy, just 7 years old, who was referred to her for ADHD and severe behavioral problems at school.
Which sounds pretty standard on paper.
On paper, it looked like a standard behavioral intervention, but when she physically examined him, his height and weight were in the 50th percentile for a 4-year-old. His physical growth had completely arrested.
A 7-year-old trapped in a 4-year-old's physical development. That is heartbreaking. It's like a plant realizing a frost is coming, so it pulls all its resources and energy away from growing new leaves just to keep the roots alive.
That is a perfect analogy.
What triggered the body to halt its own development for 3 whole years?
So she pulled his medical chart and saw his growth curve flatlined precisely at age 4. When she gently questioned the mother about that specific year, the devastating reality came to light. The boy had experienced a severe sexual assault at age 4.
Oh my God.
And alongside the cessation of his physical growth, his asthma and respiratory issues had drastically worsened.
Now, a traditional medical approach would look at stunted growth and immediately call an endocrinologist, right? If a child isn't growing, the mechanical assumption is they lack growth hormones, so you just prescribe a synthetic hormone to kickstart the system.
That's usually exactly what happens, but the endocrinologists in this case understood the underlying mechanism. They recognized this wasn't a biological deficit of growth hormone.
What was it then?
It was the overwhelming, toxic presence of stress hormones actively suppressing his physical development. The body was continuously shunting all its metabolic energy towards survival, leaving literally nothing for growth. So the prescription they gave wasn't a hormonal injection.
What did they prescribe?
Developmentally appropriate psychotherapy.
They prescribed talk therapy to restart a biological growth engine. That is incredible.
They did. The goal was to help his nervous system finally register that he was safe. And the results were profound. When the therapy helped his stress hormone levels normalize, the boy began to grow again.
His body finally realized the frost was over.
Exactly. And his asthma symptoms improved too. This case perfectly demonstrates a fundamental biological reality. The younger you are, the more plastic and impressionable your biology is.
Because your body is actively calibrating its baseline stress response during those early years.
Exactly. So even if the conscious mind has no memory of an event, the cellular biology remembers everything.
The nervous system is basically a hard drive that retains the fundamental coding even after you empty the mental trash bin.
Yes, beautifully put.
So, if childhood stress is powerful enough to physically halt human growth and double the risk of heart disease decades later, we need to understand the specific mechanics of this hijack. Like, how exactly does the brain orchestrate this massive physiological lockdown?
To understand the hijack, we have to learn at the brain's architecture. Deep inside the brain is the amygdala, which is our threat detection center. When it perceives danger, it overrides everything else.
That's the fire alarm.
Right. It instantly floods the bloodstream with adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart rate spikes to pump oxygen, your pupils dilate to take in more light, and blood is rapidly shunted away from your digestive organs and pushed into your large muscle groups.
The classic fight or flight response.
Exact.
But for a modern adult, the threat usually isn't like a bear in the woods. It's getting an
The physiological reaction is totally identical. But here is the critical, often misunderstood mechanism. When the amygdala sounds the alarm, it deliberately sends a signal to suppress the prefrontal cortex.
which is the logic part of the brain, right?
Yes, the area right behind your forehead. It's responsible for executive function, logical reasoning, impulse control, and long-term planning.
So it physically turns off the logic center, which honestly, evolutionarily, makes perfect sense. If you are dodging a speeding car, you don't want your brain wasting computational power pondering the physics of the vehicle or planning what you'll have for dinner.
No, you'd be dead.
Right, you need pure, unthinking, immediate action.
And action requires you to either fight the threat or flee from it. But imagine the threat isn't a speeding car. Imagine the threat is an unpredictable, raging parent or systemic, unavoidable bullying at school.
You can't fight or flee.
A child cannot fight an adult, and they cannot flee their own home. When the primary survival tactics are impossible, the biology resorts to two secondary survival responses: freeze or fawn.
Wait, let's explore that fawn response. Because fawning in a psychological context usually means appeasing someone, becoming hyper-compliant, prioritizing the threat's comfort over your own needs just to pacify them.
Right.
Is being a chronic people-pleaser like the person at work who can never say no, or the partner who constantly abandons their own boundaries to keep the peace? Is that actually a biological survival mechanism running on an endless loop?
It is a profound adaptation for safety. Your nervous system learned early on that blending in, being agreeable, and anticipating the needs of a volatile person kept you physically or emotionally safe. The behavior is hardwired into the survival circuitry.
But I'd imagine that creates a pretty catastrophic loop in adulthood.
It really does. Which leads us directly to the shame cycle.
The shame cycle. This is where willpower goes to die. Because you're an adult now. You know you need to have a tough conversation or apply for a better job or set a boundary. But your body perceives that friction as a life or death threat and throws you right back into a biological freeze state.
Yes. Your prefrontal cortex, your motivation and logic center, is physically disabled by your own amygdala.
So attempting to use logic and willpower to overcome an active biological freeze state is like trying to drive a car when the engine block has been removed.
The harder you press the gas pedal, the more frustrated you become, but the vehicle physically cannot move.
And when you inevitably fail to push through, you look around at colleagues or friends who seem to navigate stress effortlessly. The internal monologue turns brutal. You tell yourself, I'm lazy, I'm weak, I just lack discipline.
And that resulting shame is incredibly isolating.
Which only generates more internal stress, which keeps the amygdala firing, which keeps the prefrontal cortex suppressed. It's a total physiological trap.
But does this adaptation go deeper than brain chemistry? Like, does chronic stress actually alter our DNA?
What's fascinating here is how researchers isolated this exact question using animal models. They observed rat mothers and noticed a really distinct behavioral divide. Some mothers naturally provided extensive buffering for their pups. They spent a lot of time licking, grooming, and nurturing them. And the other group?
The other mothers were low buffering. They provided the bare minimum for survival, but offered very little comfort.
And the developmental outcomes for the pups were drastically different, I assume?
Completely different. The babies raised by the high-buffering, highly nurturing moms grew up to be resilient. When exposed to a stressor, their alarm bells would ring, but they could regulate themselves and turn the stress response off quickly.
And the low buffering group?
The pups from the low buffering moms grew into highly reactive adults. Their stress hormones stayed elevated long after a threat had passed.
Okay, but how does that connect back to their DNA?
The researchers examined the biology of these adult rats and found the differences were rooted in epigenetics. Now, the actual sequence of their DNA had not changed. They still had the same genetic code. However, the epigenetic markers, those are the biological chemical tags that sit on top of the DNA and dictate how those genes are read and expressed, were physically different between the two groups.
Oh, wow.
The low buffering environment had literally placed tags on the DNA that kept the stress response permanently amplified.
So the environment altered the expression of the genetic code itself.
Yes, exactly.
But here is the twist in the research that completely shatters the idea of a biological life sentence. The scientists conducted a cross-fostering experiment,
They
right?
did. They took babies born to the low-buffering, highly reactive biological mothers, and the moment they were born, they handed them over to the high-buffering mothers to be raised.
And the results?
The results of that single intervention change how we understand human potential. Those cross-fostered babies grew up to possess the rapid stress recovery and the exact epigenetic markers of the mother who raised them, completely overriding the genetic predispositions of the mother who birthed them.
That is incredible. The physical, tactile experience of receiving nurturing care actually changed the chemical tags on their DNA.
It did.
If the expression of our DNA can be rewritten by the presence of a nurturing environment later in life, then we possess the mechanical ability to rewire our own biology.
Yeah.
We are not trapped by our childhoods. Which brings us to the most practical question of this entire deep dive.
How do we do it?
Right. How do humans replicate what the rat mothers did? What is the human equivalent of that epigenetic rewiring?
In trauma science, that intervention is called buffering. Buffering is any relational or environmental intervention that helps an overactive nervous system re-regulate and return to a safe, physiological baseline.
Let's look at a parent hugging a terrified child after a nightmare. Culturally, we view that as a sweet, comforting gesture. But biologically, it is a targeted medical intervention, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The physical pressure of the hug stimulates the release of oxytocin, which is a powerful neurohormone. Oxytocin travels through the bloodstream and physically binds to receptors that block the activation of cortisol.
It's literally a chemical brake pedal for the stress response.
To conceptualize how buffering works over the span of a human life, we use the teeter-totter analogy. Picture a playground seesaw, balanced perfectly on a fulcrum in the center. On one side of the seesaw, you have the heavy weights of stress and adversity.
So work deadlines, financial strain, systemic bias, or health issues.
Exactly. And to keep the seesaw level, you have to place equal buffering weights on the other side. Things like safe relationships, adequate sleep, mindfulness practices, and community support.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If you experience significant adversity or chronic stress during those early plastic developmental years, the actual fulcrum of your teeter-totter mechanically shifts off-center. It slides away from the adversity side.
Yes. The foundational architecture of your nervous system is permanently altered.
Right. So now, as an adult, your teeter-totter has a very long, highly leveraged lever on the adversity side and a very short, stubby lever on the buffering side.
Which completely changes the math.
It does. Because of the physics of that shift, a tiny amount of stress, say your partner forgetting to take out the trash, has massive leverage. It slams your seesaw into the dirt. And to achieve balance, you can't just use a normal amount of buffering. You need significantly more weight placed on your short, stubby lever to counteract the shift than someone whose fulcrum is perfectly centered.
And that structural shift explains why someone might have an objectively successful life.
Right.
A secure job, a safe home, a loving family, but their internal physiological state is still chaotic.
You just don't have enough weight on the buffering side.
Exactly. If they don't intentionally and consistently apply heavy buffering weight to their shortened lever, their stress response defaults to high alert. Their immune system is relentlessly firing, which connects directly back to why the ACE study found a 50% increase in disease risk, independent of behavior.
The inflammation is just the result of a mechanical failure to balance the seesaw.
Spot on.
So what does this all mean for the listener right now? If you are an adult who didn't receive enough buffering early on, whose fulcrum is shifted, how do you practically manufacture that heavy buffering weight for yourself today?
One of the most effective clinical tools is EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It is a therapeutic framework that uses bilateral stimulation, such as following a therapist's finger back and forth with your eyes, or rhythmic tapping on alternating sides of the body while you hold a distressing memory in your mind.
How does moving your eyes or tapping actually change a memory, like mechanically?
It comes down to working memory taxation. When you engage in bilateral movement, it requires a significant amount of your brain's processing power. By taxing the working memory in the present moment, it prevents the amygdala from fully reacting to the traumatic memory being recalled.
It keeps the prefrontal cortex online.
Exactly. You are able to process the traumatic event without the body throwing you into a biological freeze state. But beneath the clinical mechanics of EMDR lies its core emotional engine, which Dr. Burke Harris calls the "I'm here" effect.
The I'm here effect is arguably the most powerful concept we've uncovered. It is the mental act of the adult version of you going back into those distressing memories, pulling up a chair next to the terrified, overwhelmed childhood version of you, and providing the exact regulated presence that was missing in that moment.
It's incredible.
You become the high buffering presence. You look at that scared nervous system and simply say, I'm here. You aren't alone anymore.
It is profound self-regulation, and importantly, you don't have to be in intensive clinical therapy to start practicing it. The Surgeon General's report outlines 7 evidence-based daily interventions that provide heavy buffering weight.
What are they?
Sleep, exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, mental health care, healthy relationships, and time in nature.
But I want to push back on the application of this just a little bit because it sounds idyllic on paper. What if you are the toxic element in your relationships right now? What if you are the one with the hair trigger temper, the one causing the chaos because your teen or daughter is always slammed to the ground? How do you transition from being a reactive volcano to, implementing mindfulness in nature walks?
It requires a radical, often uncomfortable level of self-awareness. You must accept that you cannot effectively buffer anyone else, not your children, your colleagues, or your partner, until you become an I'm here presence for your own biology.
Put your own oxygen mask on first.
Exactly. It means treating those 7 interventions not as wellness trends, but as non-negotiable medical infrastructure. Dr. Burke Harris frames it perfectly. She says, infrastructure is love in action.
You cannot wait until the seesaw is already crashing into the dirt to start searching for weights. You have to build the infrastructure while you are balanced. You have to preemptively load the buffering side of the lever every single day through deliberate choices.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, engaging in these deliberate daily practices like prioritizing sleep to clear neurotoxins, spending time in nature to lower your sympathetic tone, regulating your breathing gives your nervous system what psychologists refer to as corrective experiences.
A corrective experience is providing proof to your biology that the old survival rules no longer apply. If your childhood taught you that asking for help resulted in being mocked or ignored, the corrective experience is asking a trusted friend for help today and experiencing the physiological relief of actually receiving it.
Every single time you pause before reacting to an aggressive email, every time you choose to take a slow, deep breath instead of yelling, every time you intentionally seek out a safe connection, you are actively teaching your cellular biology a new outcome.
You're peeling those epigenetic tags off your DNA.
Yes, you are manually moving the fulcrum of your teeter-totter back toward the center.
That reframing is immensely empowering. To synthesize the journey we've taken today, trauma is not the terrible event trapped in your past. It is the active, present-day biological response echoing through your nervous system. But through intentional, daily buffering, utilizing those 7 interventions and practicing the I'm here effect, you can shift your biological fulcrum.
So if you are listening to this deep dive and you feel chronically overwhelmed, if you are paralyzed by procrastination, or if you can't seem to break a destructive habit, you must recognize that your response is biological.
Your alarm system is simply stuck.
It is not a deficit of character. You possess the agency, and now you have the mechanical playbook to rewrite the code.
Which leaves you with a final, incredibly provocative thought to explore on your own. We now know, through rigorous science and cross-fostering research, that a safe environment and regulated relationships can physically alter the way DNA is expressed. Your nervous system is constantly reading the room and adjusting its biology. If that is true, how much power do you hold to reshape not just your own physical health, but the biological legacy of the people you interact with every single day? By simply managing your own teeter-totter, your calm, regulated presence might just be the exact buffering weight that someone else desperately needs to shift theirs. Until next time.